When we vote, we don't just want an easy decision. We want to make a good decision. So what makes the difference? Let's talk about prudence. Hi everyone, Matt Brower with the Montana Catholic Conference. I've mentioned previously that I think deciding how to vote is often complex and not an easy task. And one of the problems I see with what I refer to as easy answer voting is that it can short-circuit a process that offers us an opportunity to grow in virtue and charity. Wrestling with issues through the lens of our faith, calling upon the Holy Spirit, and truly engaging in a process of discernment is holy. It's good for the soul. But there's no denying that this can be challenging and very messy sometimes. When we go to vote, we have this range of choices before us and difficult decisions to make. What can help guide us through that process? Well, certainly our conscience, but also prudence. Prudence is a virtue, meaning it's a habit, it's a disposition. It's the cardinal, meaning pivotal virtue, that allows us in a concrete situation to discern the good and the best way of achieving it. Following Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas described it as right reason in action. How do we grow in prudence? There isn't really a magic formula. Prudence is acquired through effort, through hard work. So we ought to be deliberate in our attempts to grow in prudence, and those efforts need to be marked by humility. Prudence calls us to examine the circumstances of a situation with foresight, to look forward to possible consequences that could arise from different decisions, always with a willingness to be taught, to learn, and to seek counsel, especially from those who might know more about these subjects than we do. Now, when we vote, making practical judgments in the realm of politics and policy, the Church provides us certain principles and teachings that can help guide us. One of those is the teaching regarding intrinsic evils. What's an intrinsic evil? It's something we must never do regardless of the circumstances because it is always contrary to the love of God and neighbor. Some examples include abortion, torture, racism, treating the poor as disposable, assisted suicide. Again, things we must never do. I think it's a common but also serious mistake to reduce our moral discernment in the area of voting simply down to a calculation of the intrinsic evils supported or opposed by the candidates. And there are a couple of reasons why. One, you'll often find that all the candidates for a given office favor some sort of policy that promotes an intrinsic evil. But I think the greater issue is that simply assessing whether or not an evil supported is an intrinsic evil doesn't necessarily provide us any insight into the gravity of the evil in a concrete situation. For example, lying to your Aunt Betty about the cookie that you stole from the plate before the bake sale, that's an intrinsic evil. Lying is an intrinsic evil. It's something we must never do. On the other hand, certain policy decisions that might have grave impact on the poor or jeopardize public health and safety, those may or may not involve intrinsic evils. So you can see how the gravity of an evil doesn't necessarily correspond to the category. Certainly there are intrinsic evils that can also be grave. Consider that list that I mentioned briefly before, and that's not an exhaustive list. And the Church teaches that a candidate's support for a policy that promotes an intrinsic evil can be a sufficient reason for a voter to disqualify that candidate from receiving that voter's support. But even in that situation, conscience and prudence are operative. And it's important to remember that prudence doesn't just help us to discern who not to vote for. It's the virtue that should help us to discern who to vote for. Whether it's one of the prominent candidates or a third-party candidate or a write-in candidate, prudence helps to guide us. It should lead us to ask questions about the candidates. For example, about the candidate's competency, about the opportunity and capability of a candidate to influence on a given issue, either for good or for ill, the ability of a candidate to imprint his or her character on the moral character of society, and the consequences of that. It encourages us to look at the goods promoted by the candidates. We always talk about the evils, but we should also look at the goods promoted by candidates and how some of those goods might mitigate some of the harms or evils those same candidates are supporting. Exercising prudence isn't some deficient or secondary way of engaging in moral discernment. It's the virtuous path of discernment. It's also essential that we understand that just because we must exercise prudential judgment in making moral decisions doesn't mean we have a blank check to make whatever moral decisions we want. Prudent decisions still must be grounded in reason and fact and be morally sound. The church, when it talks about prudential judgments and exercising prudence when discerning how to vote, isn't providing cover for political parties, for candidates, or for voters to simply do what they want. It's to shed light on what virtuous discernment entails. Now, one last point I'd like to make. I think there are various obstacles that impede our willingness and our ability to exercise prudence in our voting. One of those is party loyalty. As Catholics, we should not value our political lineage more than our spiritual lineage. We take our baptismal commitments and responsibilities far more seriously than that. So pray for prudence, and don't shy away from being stretched and challenged in your political discernment. This work is important enough for each one of us to take our responsibility seriously. Thank you for watching the video today. If you find these videos helpful, please spread the word and take a moment to share them with your family and friends. I hope you'll join me next time.